Hello, 1517 Podcasts listeners. This is Caleb Keith, director of the 1517 Podcast Network, with a special announcement. Throughout the entire month of June, the Podcast Network at 1517 is hosting a special fundraiser. During the time of this fundraiser, two generous donors are doubling the impact of your generosity by matching dollar for dollar gifts given up to $75,000. The Podcast Network has a goal, including this match, to raise $150,000 during the month of June. These funds will play a crucial role in expanding our network onto additional platforms like YouTube and strategically reaching new audiences with direct marketing and with the creation of new types of content. Your support isn't just figurative. It's a tangible investment in the people and tools necessary to maintain and expand the work of our podcasts. People like the hosts of your favorite shows and the editors and marketing and creative teams behind the scenes that support our podcast throughout the years. Please go to 1517.org/donate-podcast today to help us reach this $150,000 goal. Thank you for being an integral partner of the 1517 Podcast community and for your unwavering dedication to sharing the pure gospel through our shows.
Welcome to another episode of 40 Minutes in the Old Testament. 40 Minutes in the Old Testament is a 1517 Podcast Network podcast. You can go to 1517.org/podcast or check out all the other podcasts that are living over there. And while you're over there, check out everything else that 1517 is doing. And by the time this comes out, I think there's a chance that Church Fathers Academy course will be available for you to take. I mean, you should go check out the trailer for that. And if that doesn't make you want to take that course, well, I just don't know. You got to learn what the Church Fathers about the controversies, the characters, what was going on at that time. It's a course that I'm going to take. I think Chad's going to take that course too. We're going to brush up. We're going to be able to feel like we know more than other people, and then we can repent of our self-righteousness after we get done learning all these things. So join us in that endeavor. There's probably a link in the show notes, or I'll make sure there is, to that Academy course. Sign up. It's free, and you can learn all about those church fathers. Chad, we ended last episode in Job chapter 26. This is the beginning of a long stretch of things from Job himself. His friends are done. The last chapter, they got 5 verses in, and they're done. I mean, they've punched themselves out. They're like when you have a little baby, and the baby's just beyond tired, but they're fighting to sleep, and they won't go to bed, and so you say, okay, I'm going to stick you in this crib and just let you fight it out, and eventually they just give up. And this is what happened, it seems, in chapter 25, as we heard. I don't even know what kind of argument. He just says some things, and Job says, "That's all nice. Thanks for that wisdom, man. I don't know what I would do without it." And now is going to get into, as we alluded to last episode, some things about creation and nature.
Yeah, he's got some interesting images that are coming up here to describe the various ways in which God has made creation, and all creation is exposed before him. And as I alluded at the end of the last episode, there are some connections in some of the language to Genesis chapter 1. There's also some stuff here which is referenced elsewhere in Scripture. It's kind of a mythological kind of images that are pulled in here, as well as just some pretty cool ways of describing creation, the earth itself. So this will take us from verse 5 through the end of the chapter. And it's kind of a nice contrast, actually, to the way that Bildad wrapped up his very short whimper of a response, where he talks about God in the high heavens, and now Job is going to respond by talking about how the lowest depths are exposed before God. So it starts out in verse 5 by referencing the dead. That's the way it's translated. Typically, this is the Rephaim, which in some cases are referencing the kind of the spirits or the shades of the deceased. So the dead, or these spirits of the dead, what do? They tremble under the waters and their inhabitants. Sheol is naked before God, and Abaddon has no covering. So stop there, just a couple of verses in. So the dead tremble under the waters and their inhabitants. This is reflecting what's often referred to as the tripartite or stacked universe. It's the idea of the Hebrews, their conception of the world is that you have the heavens on top, and of course that's the habitation of God. And then in the middle, you have the land, the earth, and that is the inhabitants, the habitation of humanity, living humanity. And then you have underneath that kind of everything else. You got the waters, you got the deeps, you have Sheol, and that's the place of sometimes of darkness or of death itself. And so the dead trembling under the waters fits with this kind of tripartite view of the universe. The dead are under these waters. And so they're trembling, and trembling here in the sense of under the view of God himself. And building on that, he says that Sheol, which of course in the Hebrew conception of the universe is the place, kind of the equivalent of what we refer to as the grave, the place of the dead. So Sheol is unclothed, naked before God. It's not like there's a wall between God and Sheol where you can't see exactly what's going on there or who is there. It's naked before him, wallless before him, so he can see what is there. And then we have a reference to Abaddon, which is, I don't remember if we have encountered this so far in any of our texts. Maybe we have. So Abaddon is it's just a transliteration of the Hebrew, just like Sheol is. So Sheol isn't a translation; it's just a transliteration, a writing in English of the Hebrew name. Abaddon is the same thing. It's from a root in Hebrew that means to destroy. So it's the place of destruction is what Abaddon refers to. And of course, it's parallel here with Sheol, so it's another name also for the place of death. Now, it's kind of interesting here too, because you and Eric probably encountered this because you covered Revelation not very long ago. But Abaddon comes up in Revelation chapter 9. I think it's verse 11. And this is it's in the section that talks about the pit being opened up, and you have all the darkness coming out, and all these locusts coming out as well. And it says they have a king over them, the king over them, who's the angel of the bottomless pit. And it says in Hebrew, his name is Abaddon, and in Greek he is called Apollyon. So this is Revelation reflecting this Old Testament background. Abaddon sometimes is used as just kind of the place, as more or less synonymous with Sheol, the place of death. But there are a handful of places where it's personified, as death itself is also personified sometimes in the Old Testament. And later on, you have Abaddon emerging as not just a place of death, but kind of this personified being or angel of death. And that seems to be echoed in that Revelation 9:11 passage where you have Abaddon being the king of this place. And then his Greek equivalent would be Apollyon, which also means destruction. But anyway,
I've always kind of like thought it like Sheol is like always a place. It's like it's the grave, the place of the dead. Abaddon or death itself, it can take form as an enemy almost, right? So an adversary. So this is like, so you have something like in Revelation where it says like death is thrown into hell, and you're like, well, how does that work? Like, so death is like a person, right? And so Abaddon, like, it's not just that there's a place of the dead, but here you have this sort of this figure that is like the destroyer, right? The one who would would inhabit Sheol, the place of the dead, but actually is a destructive force or entity.
It's kind of like what we'll do sometimes with with sin, right? So we'll capitalize sin. It's kind of like a power that's destroyed, or we'll capitalize death in the way that you're describing it as something which is personified as a power that the Old Testament will describe as insatiable. You know,
Mm.
Sheol has opened its mouth and it just kind of gobbles down everything, or death itself is always wanting to take more more into it. And so Abaddon here and in other places in the Old Testament and Revelation 2 is personified as this being that has this power. And that's why sometimes Abaddon appears as a evil power, kind of an angel of death. But in verse 6, it's used in the sense of it's the place of death, and there's no covering. It's not hidden. God sees, in other words, what's happening in Sheol. He sees what's happening in Abaddon, or where Abaddon is.
Yeah, you almost could take it as like God is. So nothing's hidden from God. There is no covering. There's no shielding from His eyes. The place of death is not hidden from Him, and death itself is not hidden from Him.
Yeah, and I think that it could be that Hebrews 4:13 is actually playing off of this. This is where the author says, "Nothing in all creation is hidden from God's sight. Everything is uncovered and laid bare before the eyes of him to whom we must give account." So this is the New Testament equivalent of that. Or if you want another parallel, Proverbs does the same thing. So Proverbs 15:11 says, Sheol and Abaddon, so the same two places or personifications that are used here. Sheol and Abaddon lie open before the Lord. And now listen to this. This is the second part of Proverbs 15:11. So Sheol and Abaddon lie open before the Lord. How much more the hearts of the children of man? Man, I read that yesterday and I think I shuddered a little bit.
Yeah.
He's like, so if God sees what's happening in the lowest places of death, do you really think that your heart is somehow closed, like you can hide something from the Almighty? So anyway, that's verse 6. Then in verse 7, he says, he stretches out the north over the void and hangs the earth on nothing. I love that second part. Hangs the earth on nothing. It just suspended there. Now the stretching out the north here, this too, there might be a little bit something else going on here, because in Hebrew the word for north is Saphon, usually written Sapon or Tzapon. And Zaphon is pretty well known in the ancient Near East as kind of a mythological mountain in the north where the gods lived, kind of the Olympus, we might say, of the ancient Near East. So in a lot of the Baal kind of literature that we have in the Ugaritic literature, talks about the north, and so there could be and this occurs also in the Old Testament as well. So this could be the idea of God like making this famous mountain, but he hangs it. He stretches out the north, or he stretches out this mountain over the tohu. So that's translated here as void. So you probably heard the phrase at one point, tohu vavohu. Well, that's taken from Genesis 1, verse 2, where you have formlessness and void. That's tohu and vohu. So that's the word that's used here. And this is one of these connections with Genesis 1, where in the beginning God creates the heavens and the earth is tohu vavohu. It's formless and void, and darkness is over the face of the deep. So this use of tohu, void, in Job 26:8 is a link with the creation account. He stretches out the north over the void, and he hangs the earth on nothing. Then verse 8, he's going to shift to the sky. He says he binds up the waters in his thick clouds, and the cloud is not split open under them. It's kind of a cool image. It's like the clouds are like bags, like they've been stuffed with the rains, and God, he stuffs them with the rain, and he binds them up, puts them in the sky, and Job is amazed that the cloud doesn't split open under them. So they're like packed with all of this water, and they don't break open until, of course, God is ready to let them rain or let them flood the earth. And then verse 9, he continues with talking about the full moon now. He covers the face of the full moon and spreads over it his cloud. 10, he has inscribed a circle on the face of the waters at the boundary between light and darkness. I suppose what Job is going at here is the idea if you look at the boundary. So if say you're looking at if you're on the beach and you're looking over the ocean and you see that boundary where water meets sky or I guess anything on the horizon, you got kind of this circular line as it were when you're looking at it, and that's the boundary. Above it you see light, but below it is darkness. So that's a circle on the face of the waters. God has made all these things, Job is saying. And then verse 11, he picks it up. He says, the pillars of heaven tremble and are astounded at his rebuke. By his power, he stilled the sea. In Hebrew, that's Yam, which also is often personified in creation accounts. So by his power, he stilled Yam. He stilled the sea. He made it peaceful. And by his understanding, he shattered Rahab. And we have encountered Rahab once before, at least once before in the book of Job. Rahab occurs with some frequency in the Old Testament. This, by the way, a different spelling than our prostitute Rahab from the city of Jericho. That's Rahav with a rough H. This is just Rahab. And this is one of the names of the chaos monster that's often referred to in ancient Near Eastern literature about the creation of the world and the conquest of the powers of chaos. So here, Job is echoing some of that, but of course he's attributing creation to the powerful act of God. By his power, he stilled the sea or Yam, and by his understanding, he also shattered. That is, he destroyed, he conquered Rahab, this chaos.
Well, one thing that's true is for in the Bible, especially the Old Testament, but just in general, the sea is always associated with chaos. You see this in Revelation, like this is why like beasts come out of the sea and this kind of stuff. Like so when you have like by his power he stilled the sea, you might be like, oh, that's nice. Like that's cool.
Right.
There's a lot
nice
more
poetic image.
Yeah, like there's a lot more to it than that. The sea is synonymous with not being still. It's synonymous with like chaos, and that's why he stilled the sea, and by his understanding shattered Rahab. So Rahab is this chaos demon monster thing, and the reason this is one sentence is because these two things are similar, right? The sea is stilled, which is the same as saying he stilled chaos and shattered the maker of chaos.
Yeah, I mean, when you get that, I know just from personal experience, once you get that, and you start once you kind of get that background, and you start reading a lot of the stories in Scripture that involve water,
Yeah,
from that perspective, man, a lot of stuff kind of comes into clarity.
yeah.
I mean, the Old Testament for sure, where you have the creation account, but then the Red Sea, the same kind of stuff's going on at the Red Sea, and then it's all over the Psalms, and the Psalms will often use the like the roaring of the seas and the roaring of the waves and all this stuff as an image for not just chaos in general, but the chaos of the Gentile nations. So they're often described under the attribute of waves and the sea because they're seen as this place of chaos where God has not brought order to the lives of the Gentiles. And then you take all of that and you translate it over into when Jesus walks on the Sea of Galilee, or when he's asleep in the boat and the storm comes up and he stands up and he rebukes the wind and the waves. I'm like, oh, I see. But this isn't just like him flexing his divine muscles. This is him showing that he is in fact Yahweh who stills the sea and shatters Rahab. He is God in the flesh who is doing at the Sea of Galilee what the Old Testament multiple times describe him doing at creation or in rescuing his people from the enemy nations around them.
Yeah, I mean, back in the day, I mean, this is still true, but I mean, it's different now because of technology and stuff. But going out on the sea is like a really great way to die. because
yeah.
it
It's
is
very
unpredictable,
risky.
right? It's not like you like, let me tune into the weather, see what we got coming in, make sure I don't get caught up in something bad. No, it wasn't like that at all. Like you rolled out there, and if a storm rolled in, this is a real good way to die, And so, like the unpredictability of a storm at sea. This is why this language is used all the time and stuff. I actually watched. Obviously this is the ocean, but I hadn't seen it in years. It was just on, and I ended up started watching, and then I watched the whole thing. But the movie The Perfect Storm.
Oh yeah.
Which does a real good job of like if you want to be like just rightly terrified of being out on a boat in the ocean, like watch that thing. Like I mean, now imagine, it was thousands of years earlier before. Like I mean, you're in deep trouble. You get caught in a storm on the sea back then.
Yeah, I cannot fathom it. I mean, this might seem like such uh an example that isn't quite worthy of the chaos we're talking about. But I was on a cruise ship one time. I mean, those things are massive.
Yeah.
I mean, it until you walk up to one of them and you're looking at it, you don't realize how huge those things are. I mean, it's like a ship. I mean, it's like a city at sea. So I'm on one of those, and it's early in the morning, and nobody else is up. I go and I pour a cup of coffee. I'm on the deck, and I'm sitting at a table, and I got my cup of coffee and whatever on my table. I'm reading something, and all of a sudden I hear this crash, and I know it's a wave. I can tell by the sound, and all of a sudden my coffee cup just goes racing across the table. I got to grab it or I was going to hit the floor. And I mean, in that moment, I know it's something small, but in that moment, I realized, man, a single wave can do that to this massive ship. Now, just imagine you're on a ship that's just infinitely smaller than that, and you're caught in a storm. How that must feel. Talk about being out of control in the midst of chaos. That would be it.
Yeah, this is why the story of Jonah takes place this way. Like, I mean, like you try to escape God. I'll go to the sea. That's not a good idea. This sea is unpredictable. There's all kinds of chaos out there. Yeah. So, anyway, when you read sea in the Bible, just know that don't just think like, you going to the beach and sitting there and watching the waves gently caress the shore. That's not what they mean.
No. And that's why toward the end of Revelation in the new creation, it said there's no more sea.
Yep.
In other words,
Exactly right.
No more chaos.
It doesn't mean there's no more water.
No, it doesn't mean there's more water. It just means that there's no more chaos. So, two more verses in this chapter. By his wind, and in Hebrew that is ruach, which can mean wind. It can mean breath. It can mean smaller s spirit or capital S spirit. So by his ruach, and probably that is meant to be kind of a double entendre there, his wind or his spirit. By his ruach, the heavens were made fair, and his hand pierced the fleeing serpent. So that fleeing serpent is, again, a reflection of the same thing we saw with the sea and with Rahab. These chaos monsters were often depicted in serpentine form. And, that actually is a nice connection with the one who produces chaos and disorder and evil. Of course, the serpent himself, the Satan himself. So his hand pierced the fleeing serpent. So all of this has been described by Job. Everything from the earth hanging on nothing to him covering the face of the full moon to Abaddon and Sheol lying uncovered and naked before him. So Job has gone to great lengths to describe all of these aspects of creation, that nothing is hidden from him. And then I love the way he finishes this. This is one of the greatest lines in Job. He says, "Look, behold, these are but the outskirts of his ways." Oh, you think this is impressive? Well, this is really nothing. I mean, these are, as one translation puts it, these are but the outer fringe of his works. In other words, in the Chadbird paraphrase, you ain't seen nothing yet.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is, you find these things impressive? Okay, good. But these are just the outskirts of God's ways.
Yeah, you're like you're like barely past the opening credits into this movie, right? Like we got a long way to go.
He had a long, long way to go. And he goes on, how small a whisper do we hear of him? But the thunder of his power, who can understand? I think what Job is getting at when he says, "What? How small a whisper do we hear of him?" He's he basically this is his way of giving a rebuttal, I suppose, to Bildad, who seems to have everything about God figured out.
Yeah.
It's like, oh yeah, let me explain God to you in 5 verses, Job. This is the way it is. He's way up high, and he's all powerful, and you're a maggot, and you're way down low, and that's really all you need to know, Job. And Job responds, oh, well, yeah, well, let me just introduce you to the outer fringe of his works, because the God that you think you have figured out is much more powerful and mysterious than you have let on. And that takes us through the end of 26. So Job is kind of picking up steam here. He's got a few more things to say in chapter 27. And then I don't know if we'll get to 28 today. That's going to be a famous chapter in Job that's all about wisdom. And we have a lot of mining imagery that's woven into that. But we'll get there when we get there. First of all, we have to see how Job takes up his discourse again and continues to speak. So here's what he says. Job 27:2. As God lives, who has taken away my right, and the Almighty, who has made my soul bitter. This is our familiar Job coming back here. He's gone on a little creation tangent there, and now he's coming back to talk about the God who has embittered his soul and taken away his right. So this is kind of a formal language. As God lives, he goes on, as long as my breath is in me and the Spirit of God is in my nostrils, as long as all this is happening, my lips will not speak falsehood and my tongue will not utter deceit. Far be it from me to say that you are right. Till I die, I will not put away my integrity from me. I hold fast my righteousness and will not let it go. My heart does not reproach me for any of my days. That's quite a formal oath on the part of Job, and it's reaffirming what he's stated multiple times. Just I think in kind of a stronger oath kind of way. So as God lives, as the Almighty lives, he's embittered me, he's taken away my right. But as long as I live, as long as there's breath in my nostrils, I'm not going to lie. I'm not going to utter deceit. I'm not going to agree with you, my friends, that you're right, because I'm going to hold fast to my righteousness and I'm going to hold fast to my integrity. And not only will I do that, but I'm telling you that my heart, my innermost being, does not reproach me for any of my days. What I am experiencing, in other words, is not proportionate to any of the sins that I may have committed when I was a younger man.
Yeah, this is a wild way for Job to say, all right, let me make a promise here. As long as God's alive and I'm alive, I'm not going to tell the lie that you want me to tell. That's a wild thing to say, right? Like this is like the ultimate response to what to all their arguments is that what you guys maybe don't realize is that you're asking me to lie about myself, to make false confession, whatever this is, and I'm going to make this vow not to do it. So I to agree with you actually would be a sin.
Yeah, in so many movies, you'll see a guy who's, he's arrested, but he didn't really commit the crime. But the authorities think that he has, right? So what do? Well, they just wear him down. They interrogate him, and a lot of these shows, eventually they produce a false confession. Why? Because he's tired. And so they, eventually just wear him down to where he'll admit to anything and he'll sign the paper saying that he's guilty. And that's almost kind of what you would expect of Job after a while. I mean, I would have given up at chapter 10. I'm pretty sure. You're like, okay, I don't even know what it was. I don't know when I did it, but I'm guilty.
You're right. I must have done something. I'm just going to go ahead and say it.
Yeah, anything to shut you guys up. But Job won't. As you put it well, as long as God's alive and as long as I'm alive, I'm not going to agree with you. I'm not going to say yes where you want me to say yes. So he goes on, verse 7. Let my enemy be as the wicked, and let him who rises up against me be as the unrighteous. For what is the hope of the godless when God cuts him off, when God takes away his life? Will God hear his cry when distress comes upon him? Will he take delight in the Almighty? Will he call upon God at all times? I will teach you concerning the hand of God. What is with the Almighty, I will not conceal. Behold, all of you have seen it yourselves. Why then have you become altogether vain? So the general tenor of that seems to me that Job is saying, I'm not going to become as the godless or as the unrighteous, because if I do, then there's no hope that God is ever going to hear my cry. So when I call upon him, as I have been doing and as I will continue to do as long as I live, then if I were to abandon my way and go the way of the godless, then there's not going to be any hope for me. God will not hear my cry, and I will continue to cry, so I will maintain my integrity and my righteousness so that God, in fact, will hear me, because there's still hope for me, but there's no hope for the godless when God cuts him off and takes away his life. And that's the way that I read that. Does that jive with the way that you're hearing this?
Well, yeah. And I mean, and he kind of ends that section with, after saying that, saying, so I guess my lot now is I'm going to teach you concerning the hand of God, right? So I've listened to all your arguments, and what's become abundantly clear to me is that you guys need to go to school about things concerning God, and so this is what I'm going to take up. I'm going to teach you concerning the hand of God, and don't worry, what is with the Almighty, I will not conceal. Like, I'm going to tell you how it is, right? And you should have seen it yourselves, but you've become too vain. I think that's an accusation of saying that you've become haughty and arrogant, and you're thinking that you have everything figured out with this simplistic view of God. And you have this vanity and coming in and thinking you're saying wise words, and you think that you're telling me the truth and all of these things. But in fact, I'm going to have to teach you, because you have. It almost sounds like, because when he says, like, behold, you have seen it yourselves, then why are you? So in other words, some of these things are obvious, but you've closed your eyes to it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that fits with a pretty common accusation in the Old and New Testament, that people have ears but do not hear, and eyes but do not see, which is, you have that in Isaiah chapter 6. You have that, of course, when Jesus tells his parables, and that fits with this Old Testament notion of, if you become like that which you worship. So the idols infamously have eyes but do not see, ears but do not hear, hands but do not feel, feet but do not walk, and those who make them will become like them. So if you are worshiping that which is false, you become false. Become that which, if you worship that which has ears but do not hear, then you also have ears but do not hear. And that's kind of where the friends are. Even though they claim to be these very religious people, what they're worshiping is at least a very incomplete, if not a false, notion of who God is. And this has blinded their eyes so that they're no longer able to see exactly who God is and the way that he works in mysterious ways in this world. So that's the first 12 verses. Now, something, this might be another one of these situations, verses 13 and following, where Job is alluding to the arguments of his friends. We'll kind of work through this, but that's one of the explanations that's given, because some of this seems to echo the language of Job's friends more than Job himself. So we'll kind of unpack this as we go through it. But 13 starts out this way. This is the portion of a wicked man with God, and the heritage that oppressors receive from the Almighty. Okay, so that's just the introduction. So he's going to describe what basically the inheritance of the wicked is going to be. So this is their portion, or this is their heritage that they're receiving from God. He's written the will, and here's what's in the will for these evildoers. Verse 14. If his children are multiplied, so if he has a big family, well, it is for the sword, and his descendants have not enough bread. So this is going to be their inheritance. A lot of kids, well, they're going to be nothing more than destined for the sword. Or those who survive, they're going to starve. Those who survive him, the pestilence buries, and his widows do not weep. I can't help but wondering if when it said his widows do not weep, as if they're kind of like, whew, glad he's gone.
Yeah.
I mean, that's quite quite an insult. I mean, widows by definition are supposed to weep at the death of the husband, of course. But
they're not supposed to be relieved.
Yeah, not supposed to be relieved. And also, I mean, this isn't his widow. This is in the plural. So this guy was a polygamist. He had a lot of wives, a lot of widows, and none of them. That's the impression that's given anyway. None of his widows are even shedding a tear. They're like, good riddance. Glad to be done with him. Though he heap up silver like dust and pile up clothing like clay, he can pile it up, but you know who's going to wear it? The righteous. The righteous will wear it, and the innocent will divide the silver. So he can amass all the riches that he wants. I mean, he can pile it up. He can pile up silver like dust. Kind of reminds me of the days we're told that silver was worth nothing, like in the days of Solomon. Yeah, look, there's some silver on the street. You don't even pause to pick it up. Just like people don't pick up pennies today. You're just going to walk right past it. So he's going to have all this silver, all this clothing, and he's not going to wear it. Somebody else is going to. He builds his house. This is verse 18. He builds his house like a moth's and like a booth that a watchman makes. Both of those are just emblems of the brevity as well as the what's the word I'm looking for? If you build a house like a moth, it's like it's going to collapse. It's going to have holes in it, right? It's temporary. It's not going to last. Verse 19. He goes to bed rich, but will do so no more. He opens his eyes, and his wealth is gone. Goes to bed rich, wakes up poor. Terrors overtake him like a flood. In the night, a whirlwind carries him off. The east wind lifts him up, and he's gone. It sweeps him out of his place. It hurls at him without pity. He flees from its power in headlong flight. And this is the closing verse. It claps its hands at him and hisses at him from its place. So total disruption. So that's the way, what was that? Verses 13 through 23 are kind of the overall tenor of those verses. So I don't know. I mean, this sounds a lot like kind of the argument of the friends. They've talked a lot about how the prosperity of the wicked is short-lived. This is going to be what's happening to them. And that seems to be the overall theme of these verses. So maybe this is one more of these examples where Job is kind of echoing the sentiments of his friends. It's kind of the direction I'm leaning on this. What do you think, Dan?
Well, I mean, I think that what the friends say, of course, so it is not untrue if you're talking about ultimately. Right, so like, will like the deeds of the wicked ultimately prosper? Well, no. Will the unrighteous like ultimately live forever and get away with it or whatever? No. And so I don't think I think that you could have here Job say that, look, I agree, like with the end of all things, but like we're trying to deal with like the here and now. If we're talking about like eternal punishment or something, sure. But like we're talking about like temporal punishment right now. And so I don't know if this is him just reciting their words back to them or finding a space after saying, okay, I'm going to teach you a bunch of things about God because your view of God is like so small. And let me like concede these things to you. Right?
Yeah. Right.
But like although that's not really what we're dealing with right now, but sure.
Yeah, yeah, and that would fit. I mean, there have been other points in the book where you can pick up some agreement between Job and some of his friends. I mean, do keep in mind that these guys aren't coming from such radically different positions that there's no overlap between them.
Right.
Certainly, they all agree that God is all powerful, that He's omniscient, that Sheol and Abaddon lie naked before Him, and that mankind. All the friends have a low anthropology. I mean, they all agree that man is sinful and weak and not God. I mean, they all agree on a lot of different things. Where they go the different directions, of course, is their view of suffering and its cause, and where God is involved in all of this suffering. And they all, I don't think that they would, if this is Job saying what he holds to be true, the friends would agree with this. And there's, of course, things that the friends said about the wicked being punished that Job would agree with. I mean, we all understand that in the end, justice will be done. The wicked will indeed receive their judgment. The righteous will indeed receive what God has in store for them. And so this could be Job, saying, okay, we agree largely upon these sorts of inheritance, the inheritance of the wicked. Incomplete though it is, I will cede that point to you. Either way, he does seem to be kind of echoing many of the sentiments of his friends in this closing section.
Well, and he does say it on the heels of saying, by the way, like, I'm going to hold fast my righteousness and my integrity, and you are wrong. So you can be right about this, but wrong about me.
Yeah.
Right? And this is Job's whole argument, is that, well, you can be right about the wicked ultimately, not temporarily, because I can look around and know that's not true. But you're not right about me. Like, you're putting me in the wrong category. And then one of the things that's weird is that, like, I know you alluded to this, and we'll get into it next week, but if you didn't have Job 28, which seems like a different thing, it seems like it's put in there, and you're like, okay, it seems like you took a hard right and are going to talk about this thing. And if you went from this statement right into Job 29, which is more of him continuing, I feel like, his argument. Like, he says all of this stuff and then starts sort of longing for the days when he felt like God was on his side and was watching over him and this kind of stuff. And that would seem a little more seamless, right? But you're going to have this sort of break with 28. But going from 27 to 29 seems like more of the flow of his argument.
Yeah, I think in some ways, Job 28, which is this famous poem about wisdom, and has the refrain, "Where shall wisdom be found, and where is the place of understanding?" And then it kind of gives us, in summary form, the answer at the end of that chapter. It kind of serves as a little break, kind of preparing us for what is to come, and giving just a kind of a step aside and to reflect upon what wisdom is before Job then picks up his argument in chapter 29. So we'll get to that next week.
All right. Sounds good. I'll see you then.
See you then. Hello, 1517 podcast listeners. This is Chad Bird, co-host of 40 Minutes in the Old Testament, with an announcement from the 1517 Podcast Network. Throughout the entire month of June, the Podcast Network at 1517 is launching a special fundraiser, and I need your help. Every dollar you contribute will be matched by 2 generous donors, doubling the impact of your generosity. The Podcast Network needs to raise $150,000 in an effort to support the ongoing creation and expansion of our shows. The funds raised will play a crucial role in expanding our network onto additional platforms, such as YouTube, and strategically reaching new audiences with the gospel. Your support isn't just a figurative donation. It's a tangible investment in the people and tools necessary to maintain and expand the work of our podcast. please help us to reach our $150,000 goal. Simply visit www.1517.org/donate-podcast today. Thank you for being an integral partner of the 1517 podcast community and for your unwavering dedication to sharing the pure gospel through our shows.